Hi guys, today we're going to be talking about lesson plans. I'm going to give you some notes to take on the parts of the lesson plan. So you are going to need your notebook, paper, or notebook, wherever you take notes for this class. We're not going to put this on the Kim chart. We're going to put it on actual notebook paper. So if you have a place where you take notes for this class, please do that and get that out. But before we also begin going over our definitions of lesson plan, let's think about what we learned yesterday. And in the Edpuzzle, if you can take a moment and tell me 2 things that you learned about blooms and objectives yesterday, and then 2 things that maybe, or a thing that you might have noticed. If you've ever noticed any of your teacher's objectives, what did they say? Was there a blooms verb in it? Just throw that into the Edpuzzle as well. Okay, let's go ahead and start our notes. So there are lots of parts to a effective lesson plan, and you need to know all these parts when you're putting together a plan on how you're going to teach your class. And so lesson plans start with a state standard or district curriculum, then it goes to the objective, set, information model, check for understanding, guided practice, closure, independent practice, and assessment. So I'm going to give you definitions on what all these things are, and then as we work through this unit, I'm going to give you models, and we're going to do this together, and then you'll do a lesson plan on your own, okay? So let's start with a state standard. All teachers start with state standards. We don't just teach whatever we want, okay? We have to look at where the state feels that students that we are teaching, where they feel that student should be, and that's what drives our lessons, okay? So you can get the state standards off of any state website. This one's the Department of Ed. If you just Google Arizona State Standards, it'll come up, and it's by grade level. And so you'll see that students, you'll pull up a 2nd grade social studies class, and you will pull up what the state believes that students should know and be able to do by the time they're done with 2nd grade social studies, okay? And so then it kind of gives us an overview of that skill, and then we decide as teachers how we're going to teach that skill. So what are we going to do for students to get that skill before they leave us? That's our job, is coming up with the fun activity or the interesting activity to get students to learn. The standard gives us those guidelines, those blueprints for where we're going with students. Okay, so the actual definition is concise written descriptions of what students are expected to know and be able to do at a specific stage of education. So district curriculum is based off of state standards. So a lot of times districts have looked at the state standards and then they decide kind of like a direction the teacher should go. The teachers typically have some wiggle room on like what they want to teach based off of the district curriculum, but a lot of times district curriculum gives you like ideas. Like for instance, for 10th grade English, which I teach besides this class, I may get like a scope and sequence, or I may get some ideas about how to teach a certain standard. And that is part of our district curriculum, okay? But that is all based off of the state standard. So the district has based their curriculum off of what the state feels like students should be doing at certain stages of education. So even this class, Ed Professions, also has state standards. There are things that I need to make sure that you know how to do before you leave this class. So one example of this is Standard 12. That's another thing. State standards often have numbers and letters with them. And this one is Standard 12. And the standard is create a lesson plan and related activities to meet the need of the learner. So that's what we're doing right now, where I'm telling you what the definitions of a lesson plan are, because you need that basic knowledge before we move on to another activity. And so this is the standard that I'm working under right now as we are doing our lesson plan unit, is this state standard, okay? When you're doing your notes, you just need to write the definitions. You don't need to write the examples unless you want to. Okay? And you can also pause the video as we go if you need to write down your notes. Okay? So after you have your state standard, then you kind of want to know the target of learning for students. So what do we want to know that our students have learned by the end of the lesson? Okay, there needs to be an objective. This is a statement of what the learner will be able to do after the instruction. Okay, so the statement kind of tells us the why. It lets the students know the why for the lesson. It lets us, the teachers, know the why for the lesson. The how is the actual lesson, but the why is what they're going to be learning. We're doing this lesson because you're going to learn this skill at the end. Okay, there are a couple parts to an objective. It has content, and observable, measurable behavior. And that observable, measurable behavior is a Bloom's word. Okay, so you might have seen yesterday when you were looking up different pictures of Blooms that a lot of Bloom's images have like verbs underneath it. And they do that because teachers need the verbs for the objective. And you want to cover all levels of Bloom's. You don't always want to be in step 1 of Bloom's. You want to kind of be all over the place when you're teaching lessons. And it depends on where in the lesson, where in the lesson you are in your teaching, that you may be higher, or where in the unit, I guess I should say, you might be a higher Bloom's if you're towards the end of the unit and may just be at a lower Bloom's at the beginning of the unit. So you need to also be thinking about where the lesson falls in your unit, and that would guide the kind of objective that you're writing. So an example of an objective for this unit to go along with that state standard that I just showed you is the students will. That's another little tidbit. Teachers often write on their board TSW before their objective, and TSW stands for the students will. We just abbreviate it. And then we have our verb, implement. This is our verb. This is what they're doing. This is the observable, measurable behavior. And then the content is a 10-minute lesson and learning activity, okay, with their peers. So again, students will, that's pretty universal. Everybody uses that. And then the Bloom, this is your observable, measurable behavior, and it depends on the Bloom's. This is our Bloom's word, and then this is our content. Okay, so 10-minute lesson and learning activity. So you guys are going to eventually implement a 10-minute lesson and learning activity with your peers. Okay, and implement is a little bit higher up because you're actually doing it. And so again, this is kind of later on in my unit. You will also, the students will present, which is the Bloom's verb again, a lesson plan, that's the content, and on that lesson plan it has an objective and a measurement. Okay, and that is also content. So present is the Bloom's verb, lesson and objective and measurement is the content. Okay. Objectives are seen probably as one of the most important parts of a lesson plan. It is the most important part of the lesson plan. It is required by teachers at least in this district, to have their objectives written on the board. Admin wants to see objectives. Students, it's proven that if students know the objective, they're going to do better in a lesson because they know where their end goal is. They know what they are to learn. It gives them guidance and a target. So an objective is very important. Okay, our next part of the lesson plan is the anticipatory set. And it's called the anticipatory set, but most teachers just call it the set. And I liken the set to intro in an essay. An intro in the essay, the idea of an intro in an essay is to get the reader's attention. And that's essentially what you're doing with a set, is you're getting your students' attention. You're trying to get them excited about the lesson, get them ready to learn, okay? So a couple things you want to remember with the set is that it's aligned to the objective, it involves the students actively, and it links the lesson to students' past experience. It often includes stating the objective to give students a sense of direction. Okay, so 3 things to remember with a set is that it's aligned to the objective, it can call on prior knowledge, and there's active participation. And that active participation can be covert, like thinking, so you may not see it, but they're doing it. Or it could be overt, so it's something the students are doing that you see them doing. Either is fine, as long as the students are participating. Okay? So if you look at this lesson of me giving you definitions here of a lesson plan, I started out asking you what you remember from our lesson yesterday, right? And then I asked you, like, if you've seen objectives anywhere before. So this is another example. Yesterday we learned about Bloom's taxonomy. Think and then share with your neighbor one thing you learned. So Bloom's taxonomy is aligned to the objective because you have to know about Bloom's before you can write a lesson plan, because you have to know about Bloom's before you can write an objective. An objective is part of the lesson plan. So it's aligned to the objective. It calls on prior knowledge of what we did yesterday. And it's active participation because you're sharing, it's overt and covert. First you're thinking, and then you're sharing. So this covert is thinking, overt is the sharing with the neighbor part. Okay? So a set doesn't always have to be elaborate. Sometimes they are, just depends on the lesson. It can just be something as simple as this: a turn to a partner and share. There may be more that you're having them do, but again, you just want to remember these three things: that it aligns to the objective, calls on prior knowledge, and there's active participation. Okay? After you have a set, then we move into like the main meat of the lesson plan. The main part of the lesson plan is information, or information/modeling. Okay? These two go together. And information is what the student needs to know to accomplish the objective. So the teacher decides how the information is presented and how they might adjust information for students' needs. This is the step-by-step instructions for teaching the lesson. When I think about the lesson information, I think about this is my script. Okay? So if I was in a play, I would need a script to know what to do next, right? This part of your lesson plan is your script. You are writing out word for word. What am I going to say? What am I going to do? Your steps should be so specific that somebody else could take your lesson plan and teach your lesson without you telling them anything about it. Okay? So this is where you get the creativity. This is where you're showing what the students are doing to learn that skill and their objective. But you really want to map it out, especially as a new teacher. So for me, I don't really even write out lesson plans anymore because I've been teaching for 20 years almost. Okay? So I mentally do my lesson plans. But when I first started teaching, or when I was in college, I absolutely had to write step-by-step instructions out for me in my first few years for sure, just so I was comfortable. And then I could have that script. So if I get, it's just like anything else. Sometimes you get like stuck and you're like, oh, what was I going to do next? Well, you have that script in your lesson plan. You have it there for you, and you can refer to that and know what comes next. So this is super helpful for you when you're teaching and you're actually doing the steps of teaching, okay? So in the information part, the teacher is going to provide information needed for the student to accomplish the objective. Okay, this is what does a student need to do in order to finish up that skill that is part of our objective, okay? So your information must be aligned, meaning your objective and your information must match. You don't want your objective to be the student will be able to do a lesson plan, but then the information be on learning styles. Those don't match, right? They're not aligned. So you want to make sure whatever you're doing is aligned. Within the information portion of the lesson, a teacher must consider how are students getting the information. So in this part, right now, I'm lecturing essentially. I'm just doing it through video, and you're taking notes. So that's how you're getting in the information. Other times you might be reading. So I give you articles. That's how you're getting the information. Maybe I'm giving you pictures of something. That's how you're getting the information. Okay? So you need to decide as a teacher, I need to give them this information. How am I giving it to them? What am I having them do? Okay? And we know we don't always want to lecture. That seems to be students' default, especially students like in this class where it's the first time that you've ever had to like do a lesson, is we default to lecture. But we know based on learning styles that we've been learning about and multiple intelligence and all of that, that lecture may not be the most effective way, especially by itself. A lot of times we need more for the students to really understand what we're asking of them. Also, you need to, part of the information part is that you need to plan for students that have accommodation and modifications, meaning you might have students in your class that can't do the same thing that all the other kids can do. And so you have to modify what you're teaching to help get them through, to help them get to that objective. They can get to the objective, they just might get to it in a different way because of their learning style or because of their special education, their disability that they might have, okay? So lots of things to think about in the information part. Also part of the information is the modeling. And this, to me, modeling is the thing that a lot of teachers lack, a lot of times, especially new teachers, but it's the most important part of a lesson for sure, hands down. It'll make your life so much easier as a teacher if you model things, okay? And so what a model is when teachers show correct performance with labels. So you guys have probably been in a class and a teacher said, write me a paragraph. And then all the hands go up. And what's in the paragraph? What does a paragraph look like? How do I do a paragraph? I don't know what's in a paragraph, right? So there's all sorts of questions. The teacher could have saved themselves that worry and that headache if they just would have modeled what a paragraph looked like before they assigned it. So a lot of times that modeling takes away the headache for the teacher, but it also gives the students direction. It lets them know, okay, this is what I need to do, okay? So if I was having you guys write your own objectives, before I had you write your own objectives, we would, or if I was having you do a worksheet, let's say, and on that worksheet there are objectives. And I want you to circle the Bloom's verb and observable behavior, and I want you to underline the content, then identify the blooms. So this is a worksheet that you're doing. You have objectives. You're going to look at each objective. Let's say there's 5 objectives. You're going to look at each objective. You're going to label the part of the objective, circle the Bloom's verb, underline the content, and then identify the level. Well, I wouldn't just say go. That might be confusing. So I might do the first one with you. Okay? So I have, this is number 1. The students will explain the functions of cell organelles. So I'm going to start with the Bloom's verb, and I'm going to circle it for you. And I'm going to tell you to circle it on your paper so that you see what I mean. Okay? That's explain. Explain is one of our list of Bloom's verbs. Okay? Then I'm going to look for that content. So what's the content? So this is a science content. So I'm going to underline functions of the cell organelles. That's the content. So once I've circled the Bloom's and I've underlined it, then I'm going to look at my Bloom's list that I'll post on Classroom for you, and I'm going to find where does explain fall in my list of Bloom's? What level do I think this is in Bloom's? And then when I look at that sheet and I'm like, there it is, explain is level 1. So I would label that level 1. So I'm modeling for you what the worksheet would look like. Okay? And then I might do another one with you, depending on how many are in the, how many questions are in the worksheet. And then I would say, okay, now you try it. Okay? Sometimes even before, there's a saying, you might want to jot this down. I should have put it on here, but I do, we do, you do. So this part, modeling, in fact, I am going to put that on there, is the I do. I'm doing it for you so you can see what it is. The next part is the we do. We're going to do it together, or you're going to do it in partners with somebody. and then you do is the last part of a lesson plan. And that is when you do it on your own. So you've had someone help you with modeling, and then you've got to do it with a partner. So you've had some like guided practice with it, and then you do it on your own. So again, modeling is the I do part. Okay? So modeling is the I do. And go ahead and make sure that you add that to your notes too. Okay, so I do, we do, you do. Modeling is the I do. It's part of the information part of the lesson plan. So here's an example of information modeling for this specific lesson I'm doing right now. So I normally would make this part of a foldable. So they'd fold it hot dog style. Notice it's very descriptive, okay? I'm show them an example that I've made as a guide. I'm going to have them cut. I'm going to do it for them as I'm doing it. I'm going to tell them what to label based off the smartboard. I'm going to have them fold this back, repeat the process, hand out the lesson plan assignment, explain to them what they're going to do. I'm going to model a lesson plan for them, then have the groups do it together. Then they're going to present, and then they'll teach the lesson, okay? So step by step, what's going to happen during the lesson. Again, this is my script. So if somebody else came to teach this lesson, they'd be able to follow my script and be able to teach the lesson for me, okay? So part of the information in the modeling is the checks for understanding. This is the teacher monitors student progress through questioning or observations before allowing them to work independently. Okay, this has to happen during the we do stage. Okay, so up here, one second, guys. So as part of your notes, I'm going to ask that you do put this part in there as well. Okay, is the I do, we do, you do. Okay, and with this part, the we do, check for understanding comes in the we do part. Okay, also a thing called guided practice comes in the we do part, but check for understanding is in the we do part. So as students are working with each other, you're watching and you're going to ask them questions. Even during modeling, you can do this. You can stop while you're modeling. So let's say that, in fact, I will do this with you. We're going to model here is a state standard, right? And I'm going to have you write out a state standard. And then I might stop and I might ask you, what state standard did you get? Why did you choose that state standard? And I would ask you these things. Those are checked for understanding, and those need to be written out as part of your information part in modeling of your lesson plan. And the reason you do this is because you don't want kids to go and practice something wrong. You don't want to do a whole worksheet of math problems and then kind of find out that they're all wrong because you, the teacher, did not check for understanding before you sent them on their own to work independently. Okay, so you want to make sure the students are doing what they are supposed to do, and so this is through check for understanding. Whiteboards is a way to check for understanding. You can have students write things out and then put them on the whiteboard and show you. That's a check for understanding. You can do things like thumbs up as a check for understanding, or a choral response where the whole class says something together. All those are checks for understanding. So when your teachers do those, they're doing that to make sure everyone's on the same page before they move on. Okay? So how do you do that? Okay? First thing you can do is do signals, like I was just saying. You do this thing called ask, pause, call. So you ask a question, then you pause, that's teacher wait time. You pause, and then you call on someone. So you don't want to call on someone and then ask a question because that puts everybody else in the room off the hook. They know they don't have to think about the answer. But if you ask the question first, and then you pause, and then you call on someone, everybody has to think about an answer and be ready. Okay? If they can't answer correctly, you can repeat, reword, or give direct clue. You can ask them to phone a friend. A lot of times I won't call on someone until students have gotten a chance to talk with a partner. So that gives somebody that maybe doesn't know the answer a chance to learn the answer from their partner before they're like embarrassed in front of the whole class. So I might do an ask, pause, talk to your partner, then call, so that everybody has an answer to use. And then you can also ask follow-up questions after one is answered. Okay? Sorry. All right. So also, this is also we do the guided practice. Okay. On this part, this is the we do, like I said, students practice the new aligned skill under the teacher's guidance. So this is often done in your groups or your pairs. And while you're working in your groups or your pairs, the teacher typically is walking around, checking for understanding, making sure that you guys are ready to do it on your own. So I would guarantee that you've seen this in most teachers' classes. They'll lecture, they'll model, then they tell you to talk with your partners or your groups and work on something. And then eventually you'll take a test or you'll do some sort of assessment on your own. That's the independent work, or a worksheet on your own, or a math problem on your own. That's the independent work. So when you're working with your pairs, that in-between stage, that is called guided practice. So this also needs to be in your lesson plan, so that you know this is where I'm going to do guided practice. This is when they're going to do together in pairs or groups to make sure that they're ready to do their independent work. Okay? So with your partner, write the objective below on your whiteboard, then label the parts, circle the Bloom's verb, observable behavior, underline the content, then identify the Bloom. So that's the same thing that we were doing before, but this time I would have you work as a partner. So the last time I did it for you, right? And I had you circle things or underline things. Then the next time I would have you do it with pairs, and then I would have you do it on your own. Okay? Sometimes I divide up a worksheet, where if I'm working on a worksheet or if I'm working on something like that, I'll do the first two I'll model, the next two will be partners, and then the rest of the assignment is on your own. You can also do things that way for guided practice. Independent practice. Students practice the new information given. Students have opportunities to work towards mastery of the objective. Remember that objective, that's that target that I'm trying to get to, okay? Students do this on their own, okay? So for this one, I might send you out and tell you to identify an objective in a teacher's classroom and label the parts like we did in partners. So this time you would do that on your own. You would go to a teacher's class and you would find the objective and then you would label the parts and bring it back. That is your independent practice, okay? Like I said, sometimes I split up a worksheet, or you might see this in math. The teacher might do the first few problems with you, then you'll do the next couple in a group, and then the rest is homework and you do it on your own, okay? Independent practice doesn't automatically mean homework. It doesn't automatically mean a worksheet, okay? It's just whenever the student is working on their own, after something has been modeled, after they've had guided practice, now they're showing us what they've learned on their own, okay? That is the independent practice. At the end of a lesson, you need a closure. You don't want to just be like, lesson done, bye. Okay, so students engage in a mental process that allows them to summarize the learning experience. Active participation is used to check the summary process. So remember, active participation is that overt, covert, we're seeing students doing something. Or I know that they're thinking. Students are doing something. So they're either thinking, that's the covert, or it's overt while they're doing. Okay, you want to do closure after a significant teaching segment. You want to make sure it's aligned to the objective. It's showing us what they've learned, essentially a summary of information. And again, it's that active participation. Probably one of the most common Closure activities is the ticket off the door. So your teacher might say on a half sheet of paper, explain what are two parts in an effective objective, and also explain who the objectives should focus on. Okay. For this lesson, my closure will be the end question where I have you reflect on the parts of the lesson plan. And you'll see that at the end of the Ed Puzzle. Okay, so closure is just them summarizing what they have learned. This can also just be a whole class choral response at the end. It could be as the kid is leaving for the day, they're telling you one thing they learned. It could be a reflection sheet that can be closure. So there's lots of different ways to do closure activities. All right, also part of the lesson plan is the assessment. So there are actually two different kinds of assessment. There's formative, which means it's ongoing. So your guided practice, your independent practice are all forms of formative assessment. Summative assessment comes at the end of the unit. So if you're finishing up a unit in history class, let's say, and you're given a test, that's the summative assessment. The quizzes along the way or the activities the teacher has you do or the projects along the way are formative assessments. The teacher is trying to figure out if the student has met the stated objective or not. Okay? And so it can be formal, like a test or an essay, but it can also be an informal assessment, such as a thumbs up or a ticket out the door. Okay? An assessment does not always have to be this big thing, because if it's not a big thing, it's probably the formative assessment. It's ongoing. Again, that summative assessment is the end of the unit. So I think about your English classes. A lot of times the teacher will have you read articles first, right? So a formative assessment might be an attack the text of the articles that you've read, okay? Excuse me, guys. And then they may have you, so the first formative assessment is, can you attack the text? Then the teacher may have you write the first argument paragraph, let's just say, and turn that in. That's still a formative assessment. It's not the end goal yet, okay? Then they might have you write a rebuttal paragraph. That's still formative assessment. It's not the end goal. Then they might have you do an intro and conclusion and then put it all together as a rough draft. Still formative because it's still ongoing. When they have you reread your rough draft, you've already got all the feedback, you've edited and revised all of that, and you turn in, let's say, your PBA essay. That is your summative test. That is your summative assessment at the end of the unit. Your PBA, let's say. Okay? So whatever is at the end, that is the summative. And again, the whole reason for assessment is because we're trying to make sure students met that stated objective. Remember, that objective is based off the state standard that tells us this is where kids should be. And so we're trying to see, did they meet that state standard? Did they also meet that objective? And hopefully they did, okay? So this one, students complete a worksheet where they label the parts of a given objective. That's a formative assessment. I'm seeing if they know what objectives are and how to write them, okay? The lesson plan that you guys are going to teach at the end in your groups, that's the summative. That's the end goal. The end of the unit is you teaching a lesson plan. But I have all these little assessments I have to give along the way. Those are all formative. Uh-oh. What happened? Sorry, guys. Okay, well, I don't know what just happened there, and I'll have to give you the assignment separately. I will add another small video with your assignment, but that was actually all of our notes. That's the end of our notes sheet. And then I'll give you a little small tutorial of what I want you to do for your assignment now that you have all these notes. Okay, guys, thank you.